Our protagonist was overweight and unsocial. He didn't like socializing with other people, and that's why he stayed quiet, doing his work. He didn't have a girlfriend, and in the past he had even been cheated on. While living his miserable life of going home to work and work to home, something happened in the world. It kind of became a game. Everyone gained skill, etc. Since our protagonist already had experience with archery, he chose that class. The guy didn't miss a shot. In this story, you will see our protagonist becoming very, very strong, one of the most formidable in the world. At that moment, he was next to a girl with purple hair. He started to look at her softly and wondered if she might be looking at him in return. The girl started a conversation saying that she wanted to know how his weekend was. He replied that it was kind of good, but clumsy, and asked how hers had been. The girl said it was great and mentioned that she and her husband had tried to go fishing in the lake, but with the bad weather, it had been horrible. After a while, she left. He was alone in the elevator, wondering what was wrong with him. He put his hand on his forehead and commented that making friends was very difficult. He had accepted a job in an office out of state to try to start from scratch. But years had passed, and he still couldn't get it right. He couldn't communicate with people in a society that valued social skills above all else. He didn't know if he would ever fit in or be able to make friends. He also commented that the only sports he had ever tried to practice as a child were those that he could do alone. In his case, archery. But the world was not made for people like him. At that moment, he was in the office, alone. That moment he stayed there for hours, and it was only 9:00 in the morning. The hours passed, and he was in a city with no family and an office where almost no one knew his name. By noon, someone appeared out of nowhere, calling his name. "Jake," the guy said. "Some of us are going out to lunch. Do you want to come?" Jake replied, "Except for Adam. He's a born leader. I'm my complete opposite. But I like him, even though he doesn't care about doing the heavy lifting in a conversation, which makes things a lot easier for me." Jake said he normally refused these invitations, but maybe with Adam, it wouldn't be so strange. In the end, he agreed, scratching the back of his head. After a while, they started waiting for the elevator. When it opened, 2 girls appeared. The guy asked if they also wanted to join them for lunch since he had a company card. Jake explained that it was one of the few positive points of working at that place. One of the girls touched the leader's shoulder and said he was going to be fired one of these days because of how often he used that card. She then noticed Jake and said, "It's good to see you, Jake." It was very strange to see him hanging out with people like that. He gave a smile and started to think that she never says his name. He wondered what the chances were that she didn't know his name, so she didn't talk to him, right? He started to think that, on the other hand, his attention was usually focused elsewhere. Suddenly, the elevator started to shake, and everyone there wondered what it could be. The blonde guy said it was okay. It was just an electrical problem, and they didn't need to panic. But then, another tremor appeared, more violent this time. The guy shouted at Jake, our protagonist, to activate the emergency. The red-haired girl asked what was going on, until suddenly, the lights went out. The woman in the back wondered why the lights had gone out, but the guy said everything was fine. They just had to stay calm. Then, an unknown blue window appeared in front of everyone. But it wasn't just them in the elevator. There were other people outside as well. The scene even cut to a guy who was in space. The window appeared to him too, and he commented on Universe 93, saying it was just more lambs to the slaughter. Suddenly, something happened, and our protagonist wondered where he was. At that moment, a strange creature appeared in his path. He ended up saying hi, obviously like a normal person. Jake was extremely scared and asked, "What was that?" A 5-minute countdown appeared, and the entity said that she was in charge of presenting his new reality to him. They had limited time, so she asked him to make an introduction and proceed. Jake asked what kind of new reality she was talking about. A system window appeared showing that his race was human. He had no class or profession, and his status was very low, like something he'd never seen before. He wondered what all of this meant. The entity explained that it was his system list, containing various statistics, as well as some other pertinent details about his new reality. She also mentioned that the system had started its initiation when his universe finally exceeded the minimum limit, a necessary threshold to enter the multiverse. Any additional information would be transmitted to him as he needed to know. Jake looked around and asked himself what this all meant. It was hard to tell whether it was incredible or absurd when the entity pointed to him and said that now he would go to classes. He began to notice that there were several types of weapons and wondered if he should choose any of them. The entity told him that he was right to be considering it. He started to think that each of the classes came with different stat bonuses and proficiencies, but everything seemed more or less self-explanatory. The launcher class seemed like a great choice, but there had to be something better. Eventually, he found it and said that this was exactly what he was looking for. A blue system window appeared, confirming that he had chosen the archer class. The entity then mentioned that the time scheduled for the introduction was coming to an end. He also said that he would be momentarily transported to the large forest tutorial zone. Jake was very surprised by this. The entity explained that the Great Forest had various monsters and opportunities for newly initiated races, like Jake's, to grow stronger. Several beasts roamed the forest, hunting their prey, and it was necessary to kill these beasts to acquire tutorial points, TP or IP. These points would allow him to gain more powerful skill. He was also told that he would have the chance to hunt the Lord Beasts, which were much stronger. Jake then asked how long the tutorial would last. The entity replied that it would last approximately 64 days, at the end of which the remaining survivors would receive rewards based on their IP. The entity said that would be all he could share for now, and Jake realized he was turning blue. He wondered if this was the teleportation. He could feel the adrenaline surging through his body and started to get excited about the situation. A blue window appeared, stating that the intro sequence was complete and welcoming him to the tutorial. The scene then cut to the forest. Everyone who had been in the elevator at that moment was now in the same place, and they were all wondering what was going on. Jake looked at his bow and thought it wasn't that bad. The forest really was gigantic. The blonde guy told them to relax. He knew everyone was confused, but they needed to breathe and take some time to understand the whole situation. Suddenly, the ground began to shake, and the group leader warned that everyone would fall. Everyone was supposed to stay calm, and Jake explained that, at that time, he would have liked to have known one thing. Vacations weren't the only things in the hunt. At that moment, they were walking down a trail when, at the same time, another group of people appeared. Suddenly, one of them told everyone to stop and asked if they had heard that noise. He then got ready and said he knew something was there, asking the others to show themselves. The blonde guy ended up apologizing but asked the other not to attack him. According to the other guy, he was just trying to find his group again. The woman with green hair said it was just a child, while the guy said it was okay. He wouldn't attack. They asked the boy when he had last seen his group, but the boy said they had been attacked. During the fight, they had gotten separated. The guy with black hair said it had been hours ago, while the green-haired girl said they could be anywhere by now. At that moment, the guy put away his sword and said everything was fine. He then asked why the boy didn't come with them, and the woman grabbed his shoulder saying they would try to help him find his group. The boy was very happy and grateful for everyone's help. He even commented that he was very scared being alone, but what they didn't notice was that his gun had blood on it. The scene cuts back to the protagonist's group. The woman with red hair asks the leader what they should do. At that moment, another guy desperately asks if anyone else has encountered that strange alien. The leader reassured everyone that everything would be fine. They were supposed to take things one step at a time. The protagonist started to think that he was really a natural leader. They began walking again, and the leader said everything would be fine. They would start by locating shelter, water, and food based on the other pillars they saw above, which probably meant they weren't the only survivors. One of the girls was impressed, as she had managed to use magic, and the protagonist said that this time would be crucial for them to learn their skills and get the hang of the unknown system. Jake also mentioned that the group was pretty even, at least. For the most part, while the leader was holding a deer, an arrow came from far away and hit the animal. Right then, we could realize that the protagonist wasn't too bad with a bow. He was actually quite good. After a while, the girl started to heal the leader, who was a little embarrassed. Jake mentioned that Caroline was also his only healer, but she was slowly getting the hang of it. After a while, everyone gathered around a bonfire. Caroline ended up praising Proto's aim, saying he was very good with a bow. Jake was happy that she knew his name, but he said nothing and just looked down. The group leader then touched Jake's shoulder and said he wasn't prepared for this. He admitted that he wouldn't be able to talk to people like those two could. The leader reassured him that this was a new world, and the old rules no longer applied. A few hours passed, and it was time for the first watch of the night. Most of the group was asleep, but the protagonist was still awake. The woman with purple hair mentioned that her husband was supposed to meet her for lunch that day, and there were probably a few more 100 meters between them when everything went crazy. She then asked Jake if he had a girlfriend, to which he replied, no. He began to think that he never should have had one because he wasn't good at relationships. He explained that in college, he had two friends. One was named Andy, and the other was Malene. Wendy was his roommate and an incredible guy. Jake said Andy was the type of person he could trust with his life. He started talking about Malene, saying that she was his love, and he loved her. Neither of them was particularly social, but they enjoyed solitude together. Those were the two happiest years of his life, or maybe he had just convinced himself of that. He realized now that he had been blind to what was happening right in front of him. The girl with purple hair commented that maybe Jake was better off alone, as she thought about her own situation. Her stomach was in knots with anxiety. Jake, at that moment, felt the urge urge to say something, but before he could, the woman stood up, asking for permission to leave. She got up and walked away. He starts to think that Adam believed he should be a leader, and Jonah was opening up to him. Even Caroline remembered his name earlier. He begins to wonder if maybe Adam was right. Maybe things could be different there, since things were no longer the same. That thought is interrupted when a scream echoes from the forest, which abruptly stops as Jake appears. Without hesitation, he starts running toward the girl. There were 3 men, and one of them wanted to know where her group was. He asked her politely to tell him, even though she kept insisting she didn't know. The man, however, said he was supposed to do it his way. At that moment, he launches an attack at her leg. Suddenly, several arrows appear, one of which pierces one of the attackers in the neck. The others manage to defend themselves. The man who had asked for the group's location demands that the others go after the girl. One of them immediately starts running after the protagonist, but he soon realizes there's nothing around. Just as he's about to act, Jake appears in the background. He manages to cut down one of the attackers with an arrow, but that man is unusually resistant and throws Jake away. He grabs his giant axe, screaming as he tries to strike Jake. Jake manages to block the blow with his bow, but he knows the bow won't last long. Jake glances over at the girl and realizes she's passed out from the pain. At that moment, he knows he must find the other attacker. Just as he turns back, the man is preparing another blow. Jake wonders what he should do in this situation until an arrow suddenly appears. At that moment, Jake starts to think he's probably going to die there. He closes his eyes and begins to concentrate. He can feel the presence of the 2 remaining attackers. It feels like time is slowing down, though he knows it's not due to magic. His pure instinct takes over. His eyes turn red, and he easily dodges the incoming attack as if it were nothing. He catches the arrow and throws it, piercing one of the attackers in the chest. That extra fall left him staring at his hands in disbelief. He couldn't believe what had happened, but he wasn't going to hesitate. He ran, hoping to grab a dagger. In the end, he managed to defeat the other guy, but several arrows were heading in his direction. With his instincts refined, he blocked them all. He then told everyone to go after him, claiming that he would beat everyone up. An unknown figure appeared in the bushes. The figure froze in fear upon seeing the protagonist. He advanced on Jake, grabbing his coat with a dagger in his hand. "What the hell are you?" he demanded. Jake responded by grabbing an arrow and slowly pushing it into the man's eyes. The man fell to the ground in agony, and Jake prepared another arrow, piercing his chest. He continued placing arrows into the body. By the time the group arrived, they were horrified by the scene. The leader quickly realized that there had been 2 people involved, but Jake was delirious, claiming he had defeated them all. He then remembered a time when he was returning from school. He had seen a girl being bullied by 3 boys. One of them had said he would copy her test the next morning, but the girl asked if she would get caught, as it would cause her a lot of problems. The blonde boy had assured her that no one would catch her, saying it was just for them to see when the teacher wasn't looking. The girl, desperate, suggested that she could try to help them study instead, but one of the boys had slapped her, saying there was no time. Jake had done the only thing he thought would make sense. He tried to help her. He bumped into one of the boys who was holding her and shouted for him to leave her alone. They both fell to the ground, and the boy demanded to know what Jake was trying to do. Jake attempted a rear naked choke, but as they struggled, he realized something. In this world, there's no clear difference between the good guys and the bad guys. The group's healer asked Jake if he was hurt, as there was a piece of blood underneath him. He assured her he was 100 okay, and added that it didn't matter. Blood was definitely not his, until he wondered what that was. A blue message appeared in a system window. The window said he had killed a level 12 human. The bonus experience obtained from defeating an enemy above your level would be granted. He noticed that they also got points for killing other survivors. With a smile on his face, he wondered if that was the new skill he was in. He was in the archer class, had reached level 4, and his race was human. He had also reached level 20 and had points allocated to various stats. Additionally, he had managed to obtain the awakened bloodline, the hunter's bloodline. The primeval bloodline ability was unique. The power of giving mind resided in your very essence of being, unlocking the cools of perception and achieving high feats of strength. Jake wondered what kind of thing this so-called bloodline was. The group leader asked who those guys were and why they had attacked them out of nowhere. Jake explained that skill points and experience from the tutorial could probably be gained with that fight. Now, he started trying to save that girl's leg. One of them said that they needed to reconsider their survival strategy. They had to find a safe place to hide. Somewhere they could wait until the tutorial was over or something. Jake's attention was then drawn to the group's healer. She asked him why Jonah was alone in that place all the time. Jake explained that she had been feeling anxious and seemed like she needed space. But the healer said that at that moment, she was not well. It was worse. She explained that her leg was badly crushed and her healing couldn't do much. She then asked what they should do in this situation. Jake started asking her if she was blaming him. The group leader tried to calm things down, saying no. He had saved her, but he still had doubts as to why Jake had let her go alone. He could have at least woken them up. He asked Jake what he was thinking in this situation. Jake ended up excusing himself, saying it was a decision made in a split second, and he had simply followed his instinct. The healer then asked if he could think more next time because they were human, not beasts that acted carelessly. She then asked if Jake had died in that place. Jake shouted, asking her if she would control herself. He explained that Jonah had only survived because of what he had done. If he had had time to wake them all up, who knows what would have happened to her. The D came close to the leader and said that these were real humans, not servants. He asked if they would have the courage to take the life of another person to save Jonah. He pointed to them and said that the world had changed, and everyone needed to stop expecting to hold hands. By the way, they needed to adapt, learn to survive, and a guy with blue hair asked what Jake was suggesting they do. Jake looked back and said that he suggested they do what was necessary to level up and go through everything that was ahead. He asked them to do what the system wanted them to do and not blame it because they couldn't catch up. A while passed and it was daytime. Someone said that Casper had finally woken up. Jake said that was Casper, scratching his eye. I was kind of hoping everyone had already abandoned me when I woke up. Casper said that some of them had thought about it, but after talking a little, they all agreed they needed to start carrying their own weight. Jake explained that Casper was used to getting rid of his oldest brother, Adam. He was probably the most. He had a close friend. They bonded over their pathetic romantic losses. It was good to have an ally nearby. At that moment, Casper was looking at a message. Jake, with a smile on his face, said that he was still his friend until he looked at Jonah. He explained that they couldn't figure out how to save her leg, so it seemed to be the best option, and it had been Jonas's idea. At that moment, she had amputated her leg and inserted a support stick. The sea pests said that they hoped when Caroline leveled up, she would be able to learn some kind of regeneration magic. Jake commented that it was amazing. She might be the toughest of them all. The world really seemed to be giving it its all that day. Jake also mentioned that Bertram was by far the best fighter besides him, but Jonah was making good use of her long-range magic. Caroline was more impressive than they had expected. Jake said that what happened to Jonah seemed to have awakened something in her. There were potions in their equipment for beginners, but none of these potions were powerful enough to fix Jonah's leg. After a while, they were resting, unsure of how to win more. Caroline ended up proving to be an invaluable triumph. They still hadn't exchanged a single word since the night before, and Jake wondered who should speak first. Maybe they should just pretend nothing had happened. He started to think about it, considering it seemed like a good idea. An hour passed, and Casper asked Jake if he was sure about the plan. Jake said yes, commenting that it was just to play with him. The Keepsy heard the order and started to think that everything was okay. He could feel the attack approaching, trying to concentrate on his breathing, but the attack ended up hitting him. He was then asked why it wasn't working. His friend even asked if he was fine because he had tried not to throw too hard. Jake began to think that maybe the sphere of perception only worked when faced with real threats. Since Casper really didn't want to hurt him, this didn't trigger anything. The group leader ended up calling everyone together, saying they should end it for the day. They needed to find shelter for the night. After a while, they found a cave and commented that it seemed like a safe place. At least they would be protected from the rain, but not from other threats. That's why they had to be careful. Jake started to think that the cave would limit the angle from which they could cover everything inside, so they had to be cautious. While remaining alert, Jake would be protecting the others from potential attacks or threats. The group leader called Jake over and asked if he was still thinking about last night. Jake said he didn't want to just make the same mistakes again. The leader apologized for having criticized him previously, saying that he really didn't deserve it. After a while, the leader came in front with a torch and told everyone to move forward and find a good spot. Jake realized that Adam really was a good man, and he couldn't know for sure if this group would have survived that first day without him. Without Adam's leadership, Jake realized that he might not even be there anymore if it weren't for him. He remembered the first time he saw Adam. Adam had asked if his name was Jake with a smile on his face, extending his hand. He had asked Jake to join his team, hoping he wouldn't mind too much. Adam had said Jake could call it a guess, but he thought they would work very well together. Adam then offered to take Jake to the exit, and Jake agreed, though with a little embarrassment. The scene cuts to the present. They realize there is a wall and two paths. Everyone gets into a fighting position as the ground starts to shake. Suddenly, Jake told them they needed to get out, and they started running as rocks began to fall. They kept running toward the exit until Caroline almost got hit. Jake shouted her name, just as a large piece of stone was about to fall on her. In that moment, something unexpected happened. He was prepared preparing to give a momentum jump, holding his bow, but instead, he shot forward at an extraordinary speed. He managed to jump and save Caroline, but a piece of stone fell and blocked the exit. They had been separated, and Rick asked Caroline if she was okay. She replied that she was fine. Adam started shouting Jake's name, and then called out to Caroline, asking if she could hear him. Caroline said they were on the other side, and Jake told her they should stay quiet for a while, because the cave was unstable and could be dangerous. He didn't mention that there might be something else hiding there. Caroline, touching the rock, said there was a lot of movement, and they wouldn't be able to get out easily. One of the guys said he was going to try to break through the wall with his axe, but Adam told him not to touch anything, as everything could collapse. The girl with purple hair was very scared and said they couldn't just leave Jake there, but Adam tried to calm her down, saying there were other paths in the cave. They would just need to keep walking. They would have to find another way out. He started to think that this might not necessarily be true, but it was probably their best option. Saying it was okay, they would go further and try to find something in the middle of the way. He starts to think that, although they don't know what kind of beasts would be in that place, they would probably be fine alone. But his problem was protecting Caroline. What would he do if they were suddenly attacked? Caroline said they would be fine, and at the end she says Adam's name. She definitely wouldn't die in some cave there, and Jake ends up giving a smile. An hour passes, and Adam is walking with the others. He wonders if this wasn't a bad idea, but another one comforts him, saying that those two are probably best suited to survive there much longer than the four of them combined. He explains that Jake makes him a little uncomfortable, but there is no denying that he is the strongest among them all. Without counting on Caroline's cure, they would definitely be fine. But Adam doesn't understand and asks how that guy said he agreed with the boy. Of course, they all needed to be stronger to get through this, but he said he saw Jake lying in a pile of blood, smiling like a crazy person. He was definitely not normal. Adam said he barely survived an attack and couldn't blame a little strange behavior after a chaotic situation. But that guy said that people change in times of crisis, and Jake is now a loose cannon. Adam simply manages and says he was a friend. On the other side, Jake and Caroline are together. Caroline says to Jake that he is hurt, and he looks at his arm, saying that it must be from Autumn. She tells him to stop because she is going to cure him at that moment. But he has doubts and asks if she wasn't angry. She explains to him that she wouldn't let his wound get infected just because they had previously disliked him, and she asks him to stay still. At that moment, he starts to remember his training. He had to ask her some questions. She looks at him and says he should have tried to be more careful. They understood that he was strong, but no one was invincible. She also says that she was still learning these magic things, so she couldn't cure everything at any time. Jake asked her why she had chosen the healer class, but she simply responded with another question. She asked why he had chosen to be an archer. Jake simply said that he chose the class he thought would be best for survival and everything else. She repeated the word survival, saying it was the same reason she had chosen to be a healer. She also commented that although she didn't know much about the tutorial, she had played enough games to know that a healer was typically the least chosen class. Jake then asked if she still played games, since it was surprising. She replied that she didn't play anymore. She explained that her younger brother had spent a lot of time in the hospital when they were children, and sometimes she couldn't visit him for weeks. So, they used to insist on playing online games together. Jake thought to himself that he didn't know she had a brother. Caroline, blushing slightly, said that everyone always made her play as a healer because she was a girl. She admitted that, at first, she hated it. She wanted to be a fighter who wouldn't want to cause a lot of damage, right? But over time, she began to notice something. Her companions always had difficulty finding groups, while people would always ask her to join their party as a healer. It didn't matter what game she was in. Someone always needed her. She thought the tutorial might not be that different from any random game, and as she moved her arm to finish the bandage, she added, "I don't know who I'll meet in the forest, but I know that if I can heal, it will be worth a lot. It'll be worth a lot. It'll be worth protecting." That's why she had chosen to survive. Jake closed his eyes and said, "That's really smart of you." She sighed and asked if he really thought she was stupid or if he had never thought much about her. Jake started to think that maybe she was right. He had thought he was in love with her this whole time, but maybe he'd never really stopped to consider who she truly was as a person. She said it was fine, though. "You're like a 100 new person right now," she added, as she tied the last knot on the bandage. "Now, let's start moving." After a while, they reached a fork in the road. There were two routes to choose from, left and one to the right. Caroline asked Jake what they should do in this situation. The pair looked closely, and the walls made some noises. The plate was seriously concentrating as the girl called his name. He ended up asking her if she could feel that. He commented that his sphere of perception had not yet been activated, but there was something wrong. It was as if he could feel something down there, and down there were several blue eyes, thousands of them. Jake gave a smile and said that there was something terrifying there. He wondered what kind of strange feeling it was, as his instincts were warning him, but part of him was being drawn in because of it. He ended up telling her to take a look. Caroline was even surprised and asked, "How come?" Jake said that whatever was down there was something very strong and could give them experience points. Caroline replied that they weren't looking for experience points. They were trying to find their friends. Jake pointed out that they didn't know where they were at that moment. He asked if that was the way to find them. Caroline said that otherwise, they would be heading straight into danger. She crossed her arms and added that, besides that, the other path at least went in the general direction where they had come from the first time. Jake argued that there was only one path that guaranteed the experience points they needed to fight and get that XP, no matter what was down there. Caroline grew nervous, putting her hand on her forehead. She said that this was real life, not just a game. Jake began to think she was right. He hadn't been thinking logic. It was true that he just wanted to fight in that moment. Caroline said she understood that it was fun for him, but she couldn't put them at risk because of a stupid choice, especially for some points. She emphasized that it wasn't a game for them. They were just trying to survive. Jake then asked if wanting to be stronger was wrong. Wasn't there something incredible about the opportunity to live a different life? He commented that things could be different at that moment. By chance, he could do things that no normal human would have thought possible just a month ago. He ends up telling her that all she wanted was to survive. She responds, saying that some of them just liked the way things were before. She continues, saying that they weren't asked to become assassins. And she asks him if he could think about the group for a second and stop acting so selfishly. Jake looks up and starts to think. He realizes that he wouldn't get anywhere like this. He sighs and ends up agreeing. They would take the safest route, and in the end, Caroline thanks him. Some time passes, and the rest of the group is still walking. The girl with purple hair asks the others if they think the two are okay. She's really hoping that they weren't attacked or anything, but the other one says that with Jake there, they would be fine. Navigating the cave is the most complicated part, he adds. He says that his concern is high, but he's having trouble seeing very far away. That guy tells Adam that it's getting late, and if they don't find them soon, they should think about settling down and resting. But Adam says no, they have to keep walking until they know they're 100 safe. He raises the torch, trying to see something ahead. The boy asks if he's heard that, but Adam tells him to be silent. Suddenly they bend down, and Adam extinguishes the torch. He tells everyone to get ready because something is coming. The other guy gets Casper's attention and asks if he can see anything in the dark, but Casper says it's still too dark and that there's no way to make anything out. The cave is making strange noises. Adam starts sweating nervously as he stares at the endless darkness. One of them says that whatever it is, it's coming, and quickly, but then Casper speaks to them, telling them to wait for the right moment. Adam says Caroline's name. While Casper gets up, Caroline says that she finally found them, and Casper is surprised, asking if they were really fine. Caroline runs to Adam, and that guy asks if there had been a problem. Jake starts to lay his head down, looking a little nervous, until Caroline assures him that nothing had happened. She then looks at Jake and says that there was just a lot of walking. Jake looks at the ground. She looks at Adam and asks if they could find a different cave to sleep in, one that's less foldable than the one they were in. The girl with purple hair is desperate because she saw something very ugly. She ends up kicking one of the spiders that was nearby, apologizing afterward and saying it was just a spider. Casper gets down on his knees and says that she shouldn't kill spiders because they are important to maintain the ecosystem. He picks up the spider, holds it in his hand, and asks her to see its little face. It's harmless. Then he starts walking again. The guy who is up front just tells them to keep walking and stay outside of danger, and he continues holding the little spider. He mentions that it was the spider's home until he realizes there are many more spiders around. He's surprised by the number of them and says there must be a nest nearby. One of them suggests that maybe they should move soon, but Casper tells them not to worry, saying that most spiders aren't a threat to humans. Just then, the spider starts to get too close to him, and the team leader runs toward him, shouting his name. But by then, it's too late. The spider bites him. Jake quickly grabs his bow, preparing for a fight, while more spiders begin to slowly descend, surrounding them. The girl with red hair asks what they're going to do. Casper tells them not to move, but he's a little nervous, crying. There are so many spiders, and one of them has red eyes. It's gigantic. Casper starts to get very scared, but just then, an arrow suddenly appears and hits the large spider. The leader of the group pulls Casper's arm, who's still in shock, and shouts for everyone to run. The creature is going to try to kill them all. Arrows flew towards the spider, and for a moment, the group leader started to look back. Jake launched another arrow at the spider, but it easily defended itself. The spider, a mammoth spider, was level 13. At that moment, Jake found himself face to face with it and ended up smiling, while everyone else started to run. Caroline helped the one who was missing a leg to escape until the leader of the group called out to Jake, telling him to run as well. However, Jake didn't seem to want to. He apologized, pulling out a dagger, and said that this was his opportunity. As one of the spider's attacks came towards him, he cut through it and dodged the next blow, managing to pierce the spider's belly. Caroline screamed that they couldn't wait for him, but Adam was still convinced they had to wait for Jake. He refused to leave anyone behind. Jake was hit by the spider's attack, sending him flying at high speed into the wall. Some stones fell, and Adam noticed. Jake quickly got up, but he winced and said he didn't feel too good. He mentioned hearing something noisy inside him just as a system window appeared, saying that his lineage had been awakened. Jake, deep in thought, grabbed one of his arrows as the spider opened its mouth and lunged toward him. Suddenly, a red aura appeared around him as he held the dagger and arrow. A boulder was falling toward him, and he realized the cave was collapsing. He had to be quick. Jake started thinking that running away was not an option. He charged at the spider, defending himself from its attacks. He remembered Caroline saying that some people preferred the old way of life, but he knew that the old life wasn't for him anymore. Caroline had also told him this wasn't a game for them, that they were just trying to survive. But Jake's thoughts were consumed by the idea of getting stronger. It was the only thing that mattered to him now. He knew that no matter what it took, he had to become stronger. He had to become stronger because he had nothing else left, because everything was falling, and he knew that the place wouldn't last long. Jake was still trying. Adam knew Jake wouldn't listen to him. Jake was frantically fighting the giant spider, and Adam started to think that he had to make an attack to the left. He ended up dodging one of the attacks and began to feel that everything was moving very slowly. He closed his eyes to concentrate and held his dagger tightly, deciding he would just land one blow. Suddenly, he felt a giant hand behind him. That hand was struck by the sword, and Jake realized that it was Adam. Even after being hit, Adam pulled Jake away, which surprised him. Adam told him not to die. While Jake was staring at him, everything started to fall apart. They began to move outside, and the girl with purple hair, who was desperate, asked herself where Adam was. In the end, the two of them finally left. Caroline, seeing Adam, said that he was bleeding. Jake explained that he had cut Adam by accident, thinking it was the spider, and had just defended himself instinctively. Caroline, with an angry expression, asked why the hell Adam would try to fight that thing, especially after everything. But Adam interrupted, saying that everything was fine because he was still alive. One of the others said that wasn't enough. He argued that carelessness was one thing, but actively attacking another member of the group was going too far. Jake tried to explain himself, but the guy said he couldn't let this slide any longer. Adam, brushing it off, said it was just a scratch and asked if Caroline could heal it. She said yes, but there was a problem. The guy pointed at Jake and said he was the problem. He argued that the group couldn't work if they were constantly worried about one of their members losing control. Sooner or later, Jake wonders if that's how they saw him when he remembers Caroline saying they didn't ask to become killers. Jake realizes that Caroline thought he was just a killer. The guy with blue hair continued speaking, saying it like a friend calling Adam's attention. In situations like that one, things would only get worse. Jake starts to think that maybe they're right. Maybe he's just a risk to everyone in the group, or perhaps they are a risk to him. He ends up remembering that Caroline had fainted from pain. He had said that it was his concern for Jonah that made him distracted during a fight, which allowed that guy to get into his blind spot. He also remembered saving Caroline's shield, which had trapped him in the cave. There was an Adam too. If he hadn't stopped him, Adam would have killed that spider and gotten XP. Suddenly, someone notices something in the bush. Jake pulls out his bow and arrow and asks who is in that spot. A guy appears, unknown to them, holding his sword. He introduces himself as Ricardo and says he heard their commotion from the rockfall and decided to investigate. He even asks them not to worry, claiming they didn't have any intention of harming anyone. Meanwhile, Jake still holds the arrow aimed at him. Jake looks at Adam, who says that they've finally seen another human. Adam introduces himself as Adam and tells the guy they are colleagues. They also have no interest in any conflict. On the other side, the group seems gigantic. Ricardo says there's no problem. He mentions that his group and 2 others are similar to theirs, and they decided to come together to overcome everything. But Jake still isn't confident. The guy continues, saying they need all the people they can get and would love for them all to join them. The blonde guy ends up smiling, but they still weren't very confident. Ricardo says that he understands if they are reluctant, but insists that working together is in everyone's best interest. At that moment, Caroline grabs Adam's arm, and Ricardo calls her a girl. He asks if she, by any chance, wouldn't be a healer. They realize that the guy has been after Caroline the whole time. Jake remembers that she had cured him and had been very helpful. After their conversation, Caroline says that she became a healer because it was important. The unknown guy reveals that their healer had died not long ago after they entered, and they were out of potions too. He smiles, holding his sword, and comments that, "Be frank with them. They didn't need them all. They would just take whoever they wanted." The man ends up slowly drawing his sword. He said that if the healer wanted to go alone, that would be fine for him. Jake was quiet, but Adam stepped in front and asked what would happen if Coraline said no. The man just laughed. He said he was a diplomatic guy and wanted to deal with it peacefully, to keep everyone happy. But his face changed completely when he said that he didn't need it. He kept saying that they would get out of there and take the healer one way or another. Jake started to get desperate. He tried to think of something. He had to do something. He looked back and realized everyone was exhausted, and he had to be very careful. He knew he was the only one with enough energy to fight. He wondered if he could even catch that guy by surprise somehow. He also wondered how many doses he would need. There were a lot of people in his group. The man told Coraline that they didn't want to mistreat her. They just needed her and her healing power. Jake was really trying to think of something. He thought to himself that they didn't have enough of them to escape. He wondered what they were supposed to do there until Adam called Jake and placed a hand on his shoulder. He said maybe they should just go with them. The other man said that he didn't like the way the guy was looking at them. One of the others said they couldn't be bad people. They were probably just desperate. He said they probably needed to survive in that place, and that's why they were like that. Adam ended up asking Coraline, and she said she just didn't want to fight them. Jake started to think that they were seriously considering it, and it was bad for Coraline. He simply said that he trusted Adam. Adam said it was okay. They would go with those guys, but then Adam suddenly thought again and said that maybe it was a good thing. Jake ended up calling Richard and asking him about his level. Richard said he was at level N. They had a few others in their group at level 7 and higher. Richard then asked who Jake could be. Jake started thinking that this was perfect. He said he was a little disappointed. He was hoping Richard would be a little stronger. Jake said his name was Eating, and he was at level. "Screw you, Adam." Desperate, Richard asked Jake what he was doing. He was a little nervous as he said he was close to an agreement at that place. But Jake told him not to worry. They would join him. However, he didn't explain that he had bigger prey to hunt. Jake then clarified something. He was leaving his colleagues to Richard, so Richard had to take care of them, or there would be a problem. Richard asked if that was right, and Jake simply smiled. He asked Richard if he really thought he was the predator in that scenario. Jake pointed with his dagger and asked how fast Richard thought his archers were. Would they be faster than him at moving and taking his head off? At that moment, one of the archers was already preparing, making Richard feel even more nervous. Jake simply said he would be watching him. According to Jake, Caroline would definitely be safer with him, and they would need her too. Besides, if they wanted to keep Caroline happy, they would have to protect Adam as well. With this threat, Richard should think twice before messing with others. They might not agree, but it wasn't like they didn't want the danger. Jake was really hoping his crazy plan would work. Adam then spoke up, telling Jake to wait, which got both of their attention. He asked Jake what he was planning. That's when Casper grabbed Adam's shoulder and asked if he was really going to go out. Jake gave a smile and said yes. He had his own goals for that tutorial. Jake added that it was good for all of them. His chances of survival would be better with them than alone. He also told them not to worry. He would actually do the check, but someone raised their hand and asked them to wait. Adam looked into his pocket and took out some potions. He asked Jake to be careful, calling him a friend. Jake accepted and thanked him, then slowly began to leave. The blonde guy was thinking about doing something until someone spoke up, telling him not to do anything. Richard looked back and said to that guy that he knew what to do, smiling to himself. But he hardly expected what would happen to him after that. A while later, that guy was walking away, muttering that it was a waste of time. He closed his eyes and continued on his way. Walking, he said that if they weren't trying to get close to that healer or something, he would have just shot that archer in the back. As he walked away, one of the guys said the archer was probably at level 5. And another agreed, saying they could easily finish him off. Suddenly, 2 arrows appeared and hit both of that guy's eyes. The archer who was there became scared, looking around frantically and asking where the attack had come from. Another arrow appeared, hitting the other guy in the throat. They had no idea where it was coming from or which direction to look. Panicked, they ended up running from there. After a while, as they passed through the forest, a guy hidden nearby watched them. One of the men told the hidden figure to come out of the bush, but another told him to go alone. Hesitantly, the man approached the bush and opened it, only to find nothing. What he didn't expect was that Jake was behind him, wearing an evil smile. Jake punched the man, catching him off guard. However, one of the arrows shot toward Jake and hit him. He pulled it out easily, his eyes glowing red as he smiled menacingly. The man screamed at Jake to die. While shooting 2 more arrows, Jake just throws himself on the ground, and those 2 arrows end up hitting a tree. Jake looks at the guy calmly and takes an arrow. The guy wonders if he has lost sight of Jake, but that arrow ends up hitting a branch, which falls on the guy's head. He manages to defend himself with his bow, wondering where the arrow had gone, but he barely expects Jake to be behind him. Jake simply pierces the shoulder of the guy as he falls to the ground. With an evil smile, Jake says he had hurt him. Then, that one girl appears, shaking with fear, telling Jake to get away from her. Jake is momentarily dominated by a strange feeling, his eyes glowing red. On the other side, the group is walking. Richard asks them to tell him more about the archer who left the group. Adam asks if it's about Jake. Richard says there isn't much time, and then mentions he thought they were just co-workers before everything started. Richard asks if they were really just co-work, since they seemed very friendly when they were leaving. Adam explains that he was the office manager, so protecting his team comes naturally to him. It was always Richard who takes the fall, Adam says. He placed a hand on Adam's shoulder and said that was a respectable trait. He hoped Adam didn't see him as a threat because things could get tense back there. He then gave a light touch to Adam's chest and assured him that none of his companions would suffer harm in his camp. They would work together to survive, and that was a fact. Adam was surprised Richard had spoken so openly about the camp. Richard, with a smile, said it was clear that Adam had misunderstood, asking if he really thought they were just ordinary people. He then welcomed them to the base of operations, which turned out to be a considerably large facility. Richard smiled again and said it wasn't much, but they were growing with each passing day. Caroline looked around the place and said it was incredible, while the other person with purple hair remarked that it wasn't bad at all, and it was cozy. After a while, everyone was downstairs, and the boy from before said it was perfect. Adam looked back and asked Caroline what she thought. She responded that it wasn't a 5-star hotel, but in this world, there was worse. And this was better than that scary cave Richard had mentioned earlier. Richard then called everyone over and said that one of his men could show them where they would sleep. He told them to make themselves comfortable, as this was now their home. But before they could settle in, they heard some strange noises. The boy asked if they had heard that too. Suddenly, a girl came running, desperate and shouting. Richard called for the guards, and the blonde from earlier prepared her magic. Adam stood calmly, watching. One of the guards screamed to hold on, saying it was one of their own. The girl screamed "boss" while running toward Richard. Richard didn't understand the situation and asked where Nicholas was. He also wanted to know what had happened to her team. The girl explained that everyone was dead, and Richard became desperate. He asked if Nicholas had betrayed him, if he had killed everyone. The girl replied that Nicholas was dead too. Richard was stunned and nervously asked how that was possible. The girl explained that Nicholas, the archer, had ambushed them all. Richard grew even more anxious and asked, a simple man, had killed everyone. He then demanded to know why she was alive, since Nicholas had killed everyone else. The girl replied that Nicholas had wanted her to deliver a message. She said that he had told her to give Richard a message. He thought carefully and was serious about what he had said to Richard earlier, but Richard was still very nervous about the situation. He pulled the girl away and asked her what this escape was. He urged her to spill the beans. The girl then said that the guy wasn't normal at all. He was crazy, erratic, and definitely a monster. So that's it, guys. If you want the next part, then like, comment, and subscribe to our King Recap YouTube channel for more quality content. Thank you.